certain exemptions and protections under the Constitution. This delicate balance between government regulation and institutional autonomy has led to several conflicts over the years. In the years leading up to the case, the Pramati Educational Cultural Trust had been facing increased scrutiny from the government. The government had been alleging that the trust was not complying with certain regulations, and that its institutions were not meeting the required standards. The trust, on the other hand, argued that the government was overstepping its bounds and interfering with its autonomy. The dispute between the Pramati Educational Cultural Trust and the government eventually reached the Supreme Court of India. The trust contended that the government's actions were violative of its constitutional rights, including the right to establish and administer educational institutions. The government, on the other hand, argued that its regulations were necessary to ensure that institutions maintained certain standards and did not compromise the quality of education. The Supreme Court heard the arguments of both sides and meticulously examined the relevant laws and regulations. The court was faced with a difficult task, balancing the competing interests of government regulation and institutional autonomy. In the next section, we'll delve deeper into the court's ruling and its implications for education in India. The hearings in the Pramati Educational Cultural Trust case were marked by intense arguments and counter-arguments. The trust's lawyers emphasized the importance of autonomy and independence for minority-run institutions, while the government's lawyers stressed the need for regulation and oversight. The judges, for their part, posed tough questions to both sides, seeking to clarify the complex legal issues at stake. As the hearings progressed, it became clear that the case was about more than just the Pramati Educational Cultural Trust. It was about the fundamental principles of education and governance in India. The court's ruling would have far-reaching implications for thousands of educational institutions across the country, and would shape the course of education policy for years to come. The Pramati Educational Cultural Trust case raises important questions about the role of the state in education. Should the government have a say in how institutions are run? Or should institutions be free to chart their own course? The answer to this question is not straightforward, and it's a debate that has been raging for decades. One of the key issues in the Pramati Educational Cultural Trust case was the extent to which the government could regulate minority-run institutions. The trust argued that the government's regulations were overly intrusive and compromised its autonomy. The government, on the other hand, claimed that its regulations were necessary to ensure accountability and transparency. The Pramati Educational Cultural Trust case also highlights the challenges faced by minority-run institutions in India. These institutions often face discrimination and bias, and their autonomy is constantly under threat. The case shows how these institutions have to fight to protect their rights and maintain their independence. As the case wound its way through the